The Malaysia Airlines flight with 239 people on board, including 4 Americans, has gone missing.
For over a decade, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 has stood as one of aviation's most haunting enigmas.
Malaysia 370, this is Kuala Lumpur. Do you copy?
A modern aircraft vanishing without a trace, triggering an international search effort that spanned continents and oceans but yielded few answers. While the official investigation exhausted conventional methods like radar, satellite data, and ocean drift modeling, some believe that we may be mistaken in our approach. For instance, a passenger's final message from MH370 was finally decoded, and it's terrifying. As new data continues to stir debate and inspire renewed search efforts, it just might offer the missing piece to one of the world's most perplexing tragedies.
They have been able to shed more light on MH370's flight path.
Let's walk through what we know and where we stand. MH370's haunting disappearance. More than a decade has passed since Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished into the night sky, and yet the world remains haunted by the unanswered questions it left behind. The disappearance was a humanitarian tragedy, a technical failure, and a moment that shook public confidence in the systems meant to keep us safe in the skies. On March 8, 2014, what began as a routine red-eye flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing ended in a silence so complete that it fractured families, baffled investigators, and exposed startling gaps in global aviation infrastructure. With 239 lives lost and no definitive explanation, MH370 became not only one of the greatest mysteries in modern aviation, but also a symbol of how, even in an era of satellites and real-time tracking, a massive commercial aircraft could simply disappear. So, what do we know so far? Well, let's go through the facts one by one. The plane, a Boeing 777-200ER, departed Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. local time. Aboard were passengers and crew from 14 different nations, the majority of them Chinese nationals. The flight was expected to arrive in Beijing at 6:30 a.m., but just over an hour into its journey, everything changed. At 1:19 a.m., Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah radioed air traffic control with what would be the final known words from the cockpit. "Good night, Malaysian 370.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Minutes later, the aircraft's transponder went dark near the A waypoint, a critical airspace transition zone between Malaysia and Vietnam. Then, something even more perplexing occurred. The aircraft veered off course in a deliberate arc back across the Malay Peninsula and out over the Andaman Sea. Its path reconstructed later through primary radar and satellite handshake data. No distress call was made. No emergency beacon was activated. For several hours, the aircraft continued a strange, meandering journey before ultimately vanishing over the remote southern Indian Ocean. Initial efforts focused on the South China Sea, based on the assumption that the aircraft had continued on its intended path. Only after painstaking analysis of Inmarsat satellite data did investigators pivot westward, realizing the plane had likely flown for another 6 hours in the opposite direction. This triggered one of the most complex search operations in aviation history, involving the navies, satellites, and deep-sea technology from over 26 countries. Despite these efforts, nothing substantial emerged in the first year. It wasn't until July 2015 that a wing flaperon washed ashore on Reunion Island, thousands of kilometers from the projected crash zone. This confirmed for the first time that the aircraft had met its end in the Indian Ocean. Over the years, more fragments were discovered, such as interior cabin panels, wing parts, and even pieces of the engine cowling scattered across the shores of Africa and the islands of the western Indian Ocean. Yet, the main fuselage, cockpit voice recorder, and flight data recorder, collectively known as the black boxes, remain missing to this day. The disappearance of MH370 exposed troubling vulnerabilities in global aviation. Most commercial aircraft are not continuously tracked over open oceans. Real-time location data is not always mandated or integrated between countries, and critical decisions in the early stages of a crisis can be mired in bureaucracy and diplomatic hesitation. In MH370's case, precious hours were lost in the confusion about who should be responsible and where the plane may have gone. For the families of those on board, this compounded the grief. In 2018, after several years of failed searches by governments and agencies, a private American company called Ocean Infinity took up the mantle. They used autonomous underwater vehicles to scan vast swaths of the ocean floor in a high-tech, data-driven approach. The company even offered a no-find, no-fee contract to the Malaysian government, promising not to take payment unless the aircraft was located. Although their mission ultimately concluded without a breakthrough, it reignited global attention and interest in finding the truth. The tragedy of MH370 also birthed a new wave of speculation, conspiracy theories, and armchair investigations. Was it a mechanical failure, a hijacking, or something more sinister? The lack of conclusive evidence has created fertile ground for everything from plausible technical theories to far-fetched science fiction. Some investigators believe the aircraft was flown deliberately off course and crashed intentionally in a remote area to evade detection. Others suggest catastrophic decompression or electrical failure that disabled systems and incapacitated the crew and passengers. Still others point to more shadowy explanations involving military exercises, geopolitical cover-ups, or even extraterrestrial encounters. Still, there is hope. In 2024, the Malaysian government signaled willingness to reopen the search if compelling new evidence emerged. Ocean Infinity expressed readiness to resume operations with enhanced underwater scanning capabilities and improved data analytics. As technology advances, so does the possibility of finding that one elusive clue that could finally provide the answers that have remained buried for so long. For now, let's understand how a plane can disappear, literally, in thin air, vanished without a trace. Well, over the years, experts have come to agree that MH370 did not vanish due to a mechanical failure or spontaneous accident. Instead, it was likely the result of a carefully executed plan by someone intimately familiar with commercial aviation, radar systems, and international airspace protocols. Supporting this hypothesis is one of the earliest and most decisive moments in the flight, the manual shutdown of the aircraft's transponder at precisely 1:21 a.m. The transponder is not something that can malfunction quietly or shut off on its own. It must be deliberately turned off from within the cockpit. This severed the aircraft's link to civilian air traffic control, rendering it invisible to standard radar systems used by air navigation services. The timing was chillingly precise. It coincided exactly with the airspace handover between Malaysian and Vietnamese controllers. That interval, just a few minutes long, is one of the most vulnerable moments in any flight, a gap in active oversight, where responsibility passes from one nation's radar system to another. Whoever disabled the transponder did so knowing this fact. The flight's subsequent path reinforces the theory of deliberate action. Rather than proceeding along its scheduled route toward Beijing, MH370 executed a sharp left turn, flying back across the Malay Peninsula and heading northwest into the Andaman Sea. This way, the aircraft avoided heavily monitored corridors and kept largely to areas of known radar weakness. At no point did the pilots issue a distress call, nor did any automated system send out an alert indicating mechanical failure. The silence was as deliberate as the route change. As MH370 continued its strange journey, it executed additional course changes that baffled investigators. The aircraft flew in what appeared to be calculated arcs, descending and ascending at intervals that defy explanations rooted in malfunction. It turned south after reaching the northern edge of the Andaman Sea, placing itself on a trajectory that would take it deep into the southern Indian Ocean, far from any landmass, shipping lanes, or conventional search zones. Crucially, this path avoided crossing directly into Thailand's Air Defense Identification Zone. Instead, it skirted just outside its perimeter, while remaining in Malaysian airspace. This maneuver suggests intimate knowledge of military radar coverage in the region. Military radars eventually picked up the aircraft's signal, but only briefly, and not in a way that prompted immediate interception. It was a ghost flight, conducted with a level of planning that implies military-grade understanding. This sequence of actions strongly challenges the notion that MH370's disappearance was the result of a catastrophic technical failure. In such an event, one would expect either a sudden, uncontrolled descent or a continuation along the autopilot's programmed course. Neither occurred. Instead, the aircraft flew for nearly 7 hours after losing contact, following a route inconsistent with any logical emergency diversion. The only explanation that accounts for these facts is human control, a person actively navigating the aircraft away from detection and toward oblivion. Some suggest that the plane was hijacked for a political purpose, with the intent of making it vanish in a way that would baffle investigators and authorities alike. Others believe the aircraft was taken over remotely, or that it was downed as part of a covert operation. But regardless of the theory, they all stem from the same inescapable premise. What happened to MH370 was not accidental. In any case, the world was not prepared for an aircraft to vanish in this way. The radar gaps over the ocean, the lack of mandatory satellite tracking, and the delays in initiating a cross-border investigation all revealed systemic weaknesses in how international aviation is managed. In response to MH370, new tracking mandates have since been introduced, including the requirement for aircraft to report their position every 15 minutes, or even more frequently, under certain conditions. These changes, while important, came too late for MH370's passengers and their families. The aircraft's trajectory into the southern Indian Ocean also appeared designed to minimize the chances of discovery. It is one of the most desolate regions on Earth, its depths uncharted, its currents strong, its remoteness a barrier to even the most technologically advanced search efforts. The underwater search covered over 120,000 square kilometers and cost hundreds of millions of dollars, but turned up nothing conclusive. A second search by Ocean Infinity in 2018, using autonomous underwater vehicles and cutting-edge sonar, also came up empty. Yet even now, in 2025, the company has expressed readiness to launch a third search, with more refined data and improved mapping. But wait, we've unlocked more precious evidence in this regard: the AARS communication blackout. In commercial aviation, AARS, or Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, functions like a digital heartbeat between the plane and the ground. It automatically relays crucial information regarding flight status, aircraft systems, fuel levels, and engine performance to maintenance and airline operations teams. At 1:07 a.m. on March 8, 2014, while cruising over the South China Sea, MH370 sent what would be its final routine AARS transmission. This was part of a scheduled update occurring every 30 minutes. The next expected transmission, due at 1:37 a.m., never came. This was no mere oversight. AARS does not simply stop transmitting without cause, and its scheduled pings are automatic. If the system goes dark, it usually indicates one of two possibilities. Either it has been manually turned off, or the aircraft has suffered a severe electrical failure. Yet, over the following hours, the aircraft continued to fly across the sky, turn westward, cross peninsulas, and trace a long arc into the southern Indian Ocean, clearly indicating that electrical power was still functioning. The likelihood of a total power failure, in this case, is practically zero. In the event of a complete electrical system collapse, the Boeing 777 is designed to activate its ram air turbine, or RAT, a small propeller-driven emergency generator that provides power to vital flight systems. There was no indication that the RAT ever deployed. Likewise, there was no evidence that the aircraft's auxiliary power unit or engine generators stopped functioning. These systems which provide electrical redundancy, would have kicked in immediately to support flight-critical operations. Yet, AARS remained silent. Adding a disturbing layer to this enigma is the fact that AARS and the aircraft's transponder, which was shut off around 1:21 a.m., operate independently. They are not connected through a single system that can be disabled by accident. This means whoever disabled AARS also, at a later point, switched off the transponder separately. Moreover, the process to disable AARS isn't as simple as toggling a cockpit switch. While pilots can request to stop specific AARS messages from being sent, fully severing it requires access to the aircraft's avionics bay, typically beneath the cockpit, a highly secure area off-limits to passengers. This blackout could only have been executed by someone trained in aircraft systems. If there were still any lingering doubts about whether the AARS outage was part of a planned effort, they are further dispelled by what happened next. Approximately 20 to 30 minutes after the blackout, MH370's Satellite Data Unit, or SDU, responsible for relaying SATCOM or satellite communications, was mysteriously powered back on. The SDU had gone offline, likely as part of the AARS shutdown, but came back up around 2:25 a.m., allowing it to begin automatically sending hourly handshake signals to the Inmarsat satellite network. These handshakes, which are like the aircraft digitally announcing, "I'm still here," are what ultimately enabled investigators to map the plane's rough flight path deep into the Indian Ocean. The key question, then, is why would anyone turn SATCOM back on? If the plane were suffering from an emergency and power had been restored, the pilots would almost certainly have re-established voice communications or issued a Mayday call. But that never happened. There was no voice contact, no emergency beacon. The decision to reactivate SATCOM while leaving other communications dormant is one of the strangest and most suspicious elements of this entire case. It suggests that whoever was handling the aircraft in those final hours was turning systems on and off at will, managing the information visible to the outside world. Furthermore, the reactivation of SATCOM directly led to the satellite data that investigators used to draw the so-called seventh arc, the estimated final resting area for the aircraft in the remote southern Indian Ocean. The irony is stark. In trying to disappear, the person responsible unknowingly left behind just enough digital breadcrumbs for investigators to begin triangulating MH370's last movements. Still, even with this data, the precise location of the crash has never been found. The underwater searches, which covered nearly 120,000 square kilometers, yielded nothing conclusive beyond scattered pieces of debris found on Indian Ocean islands years later. The implications of this go far beyond a single plane. MH370 exposed how even the most modern aircraft, flying in the 21st century, can be made to vanish with a few keystrokes and switch toggles if the right person is in control. It also showed the aviation industry's blind spot in real-time aircraft tracking, a gap that has since prompted widespread reforms, including global satellite tracking mandates and newer systems that transmit location data every 15 minutes or less. Still, these reforms came after the fact, and they do little to ease the anguish of the 239 families whose loved ones were aboard that flight. Putting emotions aside for a while, what did the handshakes tell us? The 7 handshakes. The first notable satellite ping from the flight's SATCOM came at 2:25 a.m. on March 8, 2014, roughly an hour after MH370's last known radar position. This log-on request by the aircraft's SATCOM system indicated that the system had either been turned back on or rebooted. The aircraft's SATCOM had gone offline shortly after the transponder was switched off around 1:21 a.m., severing active contact with the ground. But this unexpected log-on shows that someone on board, likely with technical knowledge, manually restored power to the system, allowing it to reconnect with Inmarsat's satellite network. The SATCOM handshakes do not contain Jeep's coordinates or detailed flight data. However, each ping includes a signal delay timestamp, which is essentially how long it took for the signal to travel from the aircraft to the satellite and back. By calculating this delay and combining it with the known position of the satellite in geostationary orbit, investigators could determine the radial distance of the aircraft from the satellite at each handshake. Imagine a giant circle stretching out from the satellite. The aircraft was somewhere along the circumference of that circle at the moment of each ping. By intersecting these circles over time and analyzing additional variables like Doppler shift, which is the change in frequency caused by the movement of the plane relative to the satellite, experts were able to determine two potential flight paths: a northern corridor stretching across Central Asia and a southern arc descending into the Indian Ocean. Of these two routes, the southern path became the focus of search efforts. Several critical factors pointed toward this conclusion, chief among them the Doppler shift analysis, which matched the frequency changes expected if the aircraft had been heading south. Inmarsat, initially unsure of how reliable this data was in isolation, rigorously tested their methods on other aircraft flying in known routes and consistently replicated accurate location and motion readings. Their findings, confirmed by independent aviation experts and adopted by international search teams, suggested that MH370 had flown for hours over open ocean, eventually running out of fuel and plunging into the sea far from any radar coverage or flight path. 6 full handshakes were recorded after the 2:25 a.m. log-on at approximately 3:41, 4:41, 5:41, 6:41, and 7:41 a.m., and finally at 8:19 a.m. These hourly handshakes revealed that MH370 remained airborne for nearly 7 hours after its transponder and AARS were disabled, an extraordinary and unnerving realization. It eliminates the possibility of a sudden mechanical catastrophe or explosive decompression. The plane didn't go down quickly. It was still flying long after the world had lost track of it. And if the plane was in controlled flight for that entire time, it raises far more questions than it answers. Chiefly, why? The final handshake at 8:19 a.m. is particularly important. It included an unusual partial handshake shortly before the main signal, which investigators interpreted as either a failed log-on attempt or a power interruption. This anomaly has been linked to the aircraft's engines flaming out as it ran out of fuel. When the main engines cease functioning on a Boeing 777, the Auxiliary Power Unit, or APU, a backup system, kicks in, supplying power briefly to key systems. This brief window of APU power likely allowed for one final full handshake with the satellite before the aircraft plunged into the ocean, resulting in total signal loss. No further handshakes occurred at 9:19 a.m., strongly suggesting the plane was no longer airborne. The last confirmed ping allowed analysts to draw a curved line over the southern Indian Ocean, commonly referred to as the 7th arc, representing the last known signal range. Based on fuel calculations, aircraft speed estimates, and autopilot behavior modeling, analysts narrowed the likely impact zone to a region west of Australia. This vast expanse of ocean, deeper than Mount Everest, is tall and buffeted by violent currents, became the primary search area for the years that followed. Yet despite covering nearly 120,000 square kilometers of seabed, with some of the world's most advanced sonar and submersible technologies, the main wreckage of MH370 was never located. But the story does not end here. It just can't. And there is a dangerous twist here, too. Passengers' final message, finally decoded. Amid the immediate chaos and search efforts, investigators quickly uncovered a potentially explosive detail. 2 passengers on the missing flight were traveling using stolen passports. The 2 individuals in question were later identified as Puria Nur Mohammad Mehrdad, a 19-year-old Iranian, and Delavar Sayed Mohammad Reza, aged 29, also from Iran. Both had boarded the flight in Kuala Lumpur, using fraudulent travel documents, Austrian and Italian passports that had been stolen in Thailand prior to the incident. Puria was using the passport of Christian Kozel, an Austrian national whose passport had gone missing in 2012, while Delavar was using the identity of Luigi Maraldi, an Italian whose passport had been stolen in 2013. This revelation came to light within 48 hours of the plane's disappearance, after relatives of the real passport holders contacted authorities upon hearing that their names were on the flight manifest. When investigators confirmed that the real Kozel and Maraldi were alive and safe, the focus shifted quickly to the imposters. Interpol immediately flagged the stolen documents, and within days, images from Kuala Lumpur International Airport's CCTV were released to the public, showing the two men going through security together. Suspicion intensified due to the apparent coordination and timing of their travel, with many fearing that they could be part of a larger plot, potentially a hijacking, sabotage, or act of terror. At that moment, international attention fixated on the possibility that MH370 had fallen victim to an orchestrated attack. But as the dust began to settle, a more human and far less sinister story emerged. The younger of the two, Puria Nur Mohammad Merdad, was revealed to have been attempting to reach Germany, where his mother resided. According to reports from Malaysian police and statements by Iranian officials, Puria had been seeking political asylum in Europe. He had flown to Kuala Lumpur from Iran using his real passport, and from there, he intended to use the stolen Austrian passport to board a connecting flight from Beijing to Amsterdam and ultimately to Germany. He was accompanied or assisted by human smugglers, and his actions reflected a desperate attempt to flee Iran's increasingly oppressive conditions and seek a new life abroad. His companion, Delavar Sayed Mohammad Reza, was less publicly profiled, but evidence suggested he, too, was trying to migrate illegally to Europe, possibly also as an asylum seeker. No trace of extremist connections, criminal records, or aviation training was ever uncovered for either man. Interpol eventually stated that both individuals were likely victims of a people smuggling network, rather than perpetrators of any malicious plot. Despite these assurances, the global unease was understandable. The fact that two passengers with falsified identities had boarded a commercial international flight undetected highlighted serious gaps in aviation security and international border controls. At the time, Interpol maintained a database of more than 40 million stolen and lost travel documents. Yet airlines and immigration authorities in many countries, including Malaysia, did not routinely check passenger data against it. A new hope. The search for Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 is back on. Since the Boeing 777 disappeared on March 8, 2014, with 239 people on board, multinational efforts have scoured vast swathes of the ocean, but ultimately failed to find the main wreckage. What sets this new search apart is a fusion of emerging technologies, enhanced data interpretation, improved ocean current modeling, and the unrelenting efforts of victims' families. The revival is largely credited to advances in remote sensing and oceanographic modeling. Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, capable of reprocessing historical satellite imagery with exceptional clarity, is now being used to reanalyze data captured in the weeks following MH370's disappearance. Preliminary reviews suggest that possible debris fields previously overlooked may have been captured by ESA and NASA satellites in March 2014. Simultaneously, AI and machine learning tools are being applied to massive data sets from sonar and satellite sources, enabling analysts to detect patterns and anomalies far beyond what was previously possible. Ocean drift modeling has seen remarkable improvement as well. Since the Flaperon washed up on Reunion Island in July 2015, followed by confirmed debris in Mozambique, Tanzania, and Madagascar, scientists have developed far more accurate simulations of how ocean currents could have carried the wreckage from the likely crash site. These new models have tightened the estimate of MH370's point of origin in the ocean, dramatically reducing the search area and raising confidence in the probability of success. Now leading the charge is Ocean Infinity, a private marine robotics company whose 2018 expedition covered 112,000 square kilometers of seafloor using autonomous underwater vehicles. While the mission didn't locate the wreckage, the team gained invaluable insight into the seafloor terrain. This time, Ocean Infinity returns with even more advanced technology. An upgraded fleet of uncrewed surface vessels and AUVs capable of deeper dives, longer missions, and AI-assisted mapping. These machines will operate in one of the world's most remote and turbulent maritime zones, with seafloor depths reaching over 4,000 meters and unpredictable weather systems, potentially requiring up to 18 months of operations. What makes this mission bolder is Ocean Infinity's no-find, no-fee proposal. If the wreckage is found, the company will receive up to $70 million from the Malaysian government. If not, it walks away unpaid. The model reflects both the company's confidence in its tools and its ambition to set a new benchmark for private sector involvement in global-scale search missions. Ocean Infinity has already recovered the Argentine Navy's RA San Juan and the bulk carrier Stellar Daisy, both difficult missions, but MH370 remains the ultimate challenge. Central to the renewed operation is a reanalysis of the handshake signals transmitted by MH370 after losing radar contact. These 7 pings, recorded by the Inmarsat satellite network, helped investigators estimate the aircraft's path through burst timing offset and burst frequency offset metrics. While this data pointed to a southern arc ending in the Indian Ocean, it lacked precision. Today's tools, including enhanced signal processing and refined mathematical modeling, have allowed experts to revisit the same data with a sharper focus, revealing new interpretations and narrowing down previously ambiguous zones. These improvements, when combined with revised drift simulations, have directed the search to a specific area just outside prior priority zones, an area potentially overlooked due to earlier limitations in sonar resolution or seafloor complexity. But perhaps the most controversial and compelling addition to the investigation is the integration of SPR, short for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter, data introduced by independent researcher Richard Godfrey. Originally designed to track atmospheric radio signals across the globe, the SPR network collects disruptions caused by objects, like aircraft, passing through radio transmission paths. Godfrey argues that MH370's movements disrupted over 500 SPR paths on the night of its disappearance, creating a traceable flight path that aligns with, but also deviates from, previously established models. His analysis suggests that MH370 may not have simply flown south on autopilot until fuel exhaustion. Instead, he proposes the aircraft executed deliberate maneuvers, possibly including figure-8 patterns and holding loops, suggesting the flight remained under manual control far longer than assumed. Even more startling, Godfrey's reconstructed path closely mirrors segments of a simulated flight route discovered on Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah's home flight simulator. While initially dismissed as a coincidence, the similarities now appear more than incidental, hinting at possible premeditation. Godfrey's work, though innovative, has faced criticism. Skeptics argue that SPR was never intended to track fast-moving aircraft and lacks the resolution of radar or satellite data. Its accuracy is questioned due to susceptibility to atmospheric noise and the absence of peer-reviewed aviation applications. Still, proponents argue that it opens a new frontier in forensic signal analysis and embodies the importance of unconventional thinking in complex investigations. In any case, this renewed search for MH370 goes beyond recovering a plane. It symbolizes our determination to confront ambiguity with science, to channel grief into action, and to turn technological progress into tangible answers. Whether or not SPR is ultimately validated, it has expanded the investigative toolbox and ensured that MH370 remains a living pursuit, not a forgotten tragedy. As Ocean Infinity prepares to return to the depths, the mission is not just a quest for wreckage, but also a reflection of the global community's unwillingness to let their story remain unfinished. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.